Everyone considered him the coward of the cow.
Remember when country music had a sense of humor about itself? Before the genre became all truck commercials and stadium-sized anthems, Nashville turned out songs so ridiculous, so deliberately dumb, so cheerfully absurd that audiences couldn't help falling in love with them. These weren't your tortured heartbreak ballads or your Dust Bowl laments. These were songs that made you snort your sweet tea. Today we're counting down 10 joke country songs that somehow crossed over from honky-tonk jukeboxes to the top of charts worldwide. If you're loving these songs, hit subscribe and drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from and which song still gives you chills? Number 10. Drop Kick Me Jesus Through the Goalposts of Life by Bobby Bare, 1976.
Drop kick me Jesus through the goalposts of life.
Bobby Bare was a legitimate country star before this song arrived. He'd charted dozens of times through the 60s and early 70s with serious material, Real Aching, Drinking Alone at Last Call Country. So when he released a song that opened with a man asking the Lord to treat him like a football and boot him straight through the uprights of life, it caught even his most devoted fans off guard. The songwriter was Paul Kraft, a Nashville veteran who wrote the lyric after watching a college football game on television one Sunday afternoon. The mental image of a football sailing cleanly between the goalposts as a metaphor for spiritual redemption struck him as so perfectly ridiculous that he wrote the entire song in about an hour. The chorus alone, asking Jesus to kick away my sinfulness and help me beat the odds, managed to sound simultaneously devout and completely insane. Several radio stations in the Bible Belt refused to touch it, convinced it was blasphemous. This only fed the fire. The song climbed to number 6 on the Billboard country chart and crossed over to pop radio, where disc jockeys played it between Fleetwood Mac and the Eagles to genuinely baffled but delighted listeners. Bare performed it on television variety shows with an expression of complete sincerity, never once breaking character or acknowledging the joke. That straight-faced delivery was everything. You believed he genuinely wanted to be dropkicked through those goalposts, and that belief made the whole thing work. The song remains a beloved oddity in his catalog, the one track that gets played at tailgate parties and Sunday school retreats alike, which might be the strangest crossover achievement in country music history. Number 9. May the Bird of Paradise Fly Up Your Nose by Little Jimmy Dickens, 1965. Little Jimmy Dickens stood 4 feet 11 inches tall in his rhinestone-encrusted stage boots, and he spent his entire career proving that you didn't need height to fill a room. This song, a masterpiece of escalating bad luck and cheerful spite, hit number 1 on the country chart and crossed into the Pop Top 40 at a moment when the British invasion was supposed to have killed traditional country dead. The song was written by Neil Merritt, who had spent years pitching it to every singer in Nashville without a taker. The premise was simple: a series of increasingly petty curses directed at some unnamed irritant in the narrator's life. May the bird of paradise fly up your nose. May an elephant caress you with his toes. The verses piled on fresh indignities until listeners were doing math trying to track all the catastrophes being wished upon this poor anonymous soul. Dickens was the ideal vehicle. His size gave him an underdog quality that made the gleeful nastiness feel harmless, almost sweet. He delivered each curse with the cheerful energy of a man presenting a birthday cake. The rhinestone suits helped. Nobody wearing that much glitter could possibly mean anyone genuine harm. He performed it at the Grand Ole Opry for decades afterward, well into his 80s, and the audience sang every word back every single time. Number 8. Alhab the Arab by Ray Stevens, 1962.
She called the burning sand. He had emeralds and rubies just dripping off of him.
Ray Stevens was a young studio musician and aspiring singer in Nashville when he wrote and recorded this character piece about a fictional desert sheik and his camel named Clyde. The song arrived during a period when mainstream pop still had room for novelty records. Stan Freberg, Alan Sherman, and others had proven you could reach a wide audience with comedy material. But nobody had really planted that flag in country territory. Stevens played Ahab as a broad caricature, throwing in every desert film cliché he could excavate, including a harem scene that CBS was not entirely sure how to handle when he appeared on television. The camel Clyde provided scene-stealing backup, a sort of equine straight man whose increasingly inconvenient contributions to the narrative drove the final act. The production was brilliant in its low-budget resourcefulness. Stevens performed every character voice himself, shifting between Ahab's exaggerated accent and the narrator's straight delivery so quickly that listeners played it back multiple times just to catch everything happening.
He wore a big old turban.
The sound effects were layered in with genuine craftsmanship. This was comedy construction masquerading as a throwaway pop record. Ahab the Arab showed that country's sense of humor was exportable. Northern pop audiences who wouldn't have touched a steel guitar record found themselves playing this one over and over. The song became Stevens's calling card for years before the streak arrived and replaced it. Number 7, Coward of the County by Kenny Rogers, 1979.
Promise me, son, not to do.
This one is a little different from the others on this list, and that's part of what makes it so fascinating. Coward of the County is not obviously a joke song. It tells a dark, violent story. A young man raised to avoid fighting who must ultimately confront the men who attacked his girlfriend. Nobody is laughing at the premise, but Kenny Rogers played it with a theatricality so outsized, a melodrama so richly committed, that it occupied the same territory as parody without technically crossing the line. The villain characters, the Gatlin Boys, had names so perfectly B-movie evil that audiences couldn't quite hold a straight face. The climactic violence, delivered in Rogers's warm baritone over a production that sounded like the world's most expensive Hallmark card, achieved a kind of sublime absurdity.
The things I've done, walk away from trouble.
The song hit number 1 in the United States, topped charts in Canada, Australia, and Ireland, and crossed to the pop chart where it reached number 3. It became one of the best-selling country singles of 1979 despite, or perhaps because of, being simultaneously sincere and completely bonkers. Tommy's final speech to his dead uncle, delivered with the gravity of a man accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award, is either deeply moving or the funniest thing Rogers ever recorded, depending on the day and your mood. Rogers understood the song existed on that knife's edge. He always performed it straight, letting the audience decide which side they were landing on. Number 6. If I Said You Had a Beautiful Body, Would You Hold It Against Me? By the Bellamy Brothers, 1979.
If I said you have a beautiful body, would you hold it?
The title is the entire joke. Howard and David Bellamy knew this when they wrote it, and they banked everything on the thesis that a pickup line so old and so transparently terrible would, paradoxically, be irresistible. They were not wrong. Howard Bellamy has told the story many times. He overheard someone use the line in a Florida bar, the kind of ancient groaner that had been making the rounds since at least the 1950s, and realized it had never been enshrined in a country song. The verse and chorus built around it took about 20 minutes to write. The melody was simple, the production was breezy, and the whole thing was designed to sound effortless, because anything that tried too hard would kill the joke. Warner Brothers Nashville wasn't sure. The title alone made promotion complicated. Would radio stations play a song whose title was technically a double entendre? The Bellamys had already proven themselves with Let Your Love Flow, their 1976 breakthrough.
If I swore you were an angel, would you treat me like...
The Bellamy brothers performed it on every television appearance with identical expressions, Howard deadpan, David grinning slightly, both committed to the theory that the best way to tell a joke is to seem as though you're not telling one at all. The song became their signature, the thing they closed sets with for the next 40 years. Audiences sang the title back at them in concert halls across 4 continents. The punchline of the song is that there is no punchline. The joke is the title, fully revealed in the first second, and yet somehow it still lands every single time. Enjoying this musical video? Subscribe and turn on the bell. It's the only way to catch our next deep dive into the music you grew up with. Number 5. A Boy Named Sue by Johnny Cash, 1969.
Well, my daddy left home when I was 3, didn't leave very much to my ma and me.
Johnny Cash did not write this song. Shel Silverstein did, the same poet and cartoonist behind Where the Sidewalk Ends and The Giving Tree, who turned out to have a sideline writing the most perfectly constructed novelty country songs imaginable. Cash was performing at San Quentin State Prison in February 1969 when he debuted the song, reading the lyrics off a sheet of paper because he hadn't had time to memorize them. The story was absurdist frontier revenge comedy. A boy named Sue spends his life hunting the father who abandoned him with that name, finds him, fights him in a bar described with Homeric specificity, and ultimately understands that the name itself, the humiliation of it, the constant fighting it provoked, made him tough enough to survive a hard world.
Guitar and an empty bottle of booze. Now I don't blame him 'cause he running ahead.
The father's logic, delivered in the middle of a brawl, is simultaneously the worst and most persuasive parenting philosophy ever articulated. Cash performing it in front of inmates produced the recording that the world heard. The prisoners caught every joke in real time, their laughter and whoops audible throughout, which gave the record an energy that no studio version could have manufactured. Cash stumbled slightly on one verse and corrected himself mid-lyric. The editors left it in because removing it would have removed something alive from the performance. Number 4. Harper Valley PTA by Jeannie the 100th.
Tell you all a story about a Harper Valley widowed wife.
Riley, 1968. Tom T. Hall wrote this song as sharp social satire, and Jeannie the 100th. Riley performed it as something that felt at the time like a controlled explosion. The premise: a widow receives a note from the local PTA calling out her short skirts and wild behavior. She attends the next meeting and demolishes every member of the committee with specific, documented evidence of their own hypocrisy. The banker's drinking, the widow's widow-making, the whole valley's dirty laundry, aired in 4 minutes of extremely satisfying country pop. Hall wrote it in about an hour, inspired loosely by events in the small Texas town where he grew up. Riley was a relatively unknown session singer when she recorded it. The production had a slightly funky backbeat that didn't sound quite like anything else on country radio in 1968.
Who had a teenage daughter who attended.
The bass line alone was enough to make program directors look twice. The record went to number 1 in a single week, which almost never happens. It stayed there for 3 weeks on the country chart and simultaneously hit number 1 on the pop chart, making Riley one of the very few artists to top both charts with the same single in the same week on its first appearance. She sold over 6 million copies worldwide. The joke, of course, is that the song is the PTA letter. The widow reads her town's pretensions back to them with the same righteous indignation they deployed against her, and the satisfaction is complete. Audiences in 1968 were not supposed to find this funny. The subject matter touched real anger about small-town judgment, women's autonomy, and social hypocrisy. But Riley's delivery was so triumphant that the whole thing played like the funniest revenge fantasy ever set to steel guitar. It was adapted into a 1978 film and a short-lived television series, which tells you something about how deeply the premise resonated. The widow won. The PTA lost. The record sold 6 million copies. Justice was served on a 45 revolutions per minute platter. Number 3. The Streak by Ray Stevens, 1974.
Oh, yes, they call him the Streak.
Ray Stevens appears on this list twice, which is either remarkable or entirely predictable depending on how you feel about a man who made a 40-year career out of songs that made people snort beverages through their noses. Streaking, running naked through public spaces, became one of the more bewildering American fads of 1974, appearing at sporting events, college campuses, and most memorably the Academy Awards ceremony, where a man named Robert Opel sprinted across the stage behind host David Niven during a live broadcast. Niven handled it with extraordinary composure. Stevens handled it by turning the whole phenomenon into a mock news report featuring a hapless husband desperately trying to shield his wife Ethel's innocent eyes. "Don't look, Ethel," became one of the most quoted lines in American households that year. Children shouted it at recess. Adults used it as a punchline at dinner parties. Stevens performed multiple voices throughout the song, alternating between a breathless reporter and the increasingly frantic husband, layering the chaos with escalating absurdity. The timing was almost surreal. Stevens had written and recorded the song before the Academy Awards incident. When Opel ran across that stage behind David Niven on March 27, 1974, The Streak had already been recorded and scheduled for release. The incident hit the news and the song landed in stores roughly 10 days later. The whole country was already talking about streaking, and Stevens had the unofficial soundtrack ready to go. It spent 3 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, topped the country chart, topped the UK chart, and sold over 5 million copies. Stevens had written a song timed to a fad, and the fad had obligingly produced its defining moment just before release. The luck of it was almost as funny as the song itself. Number 2, Elvira by the Oak Ridge Boys, 1981. Dallas Frazier wrote Elvira in 1966. He wrote it in about 15 minutes. He recorded it, it went nowhere, and he moved on. Various other artists recorded it over the next 15 years with identical results. The song sat in Nashville's collective back catalog like an embarrassing piece of furniture nobody wanted to throw out but nobody quite knew what to do with. Then the Oak Ridge Boys heard it. The group had been searching for something to break them out of their gospel and traditional country lane when producer Ron Chancey played the demo. 4-part harmony country group meets a song that opened with the word Elvira drawn out across what felt like 3 full seconds. It was an objectively ridiculous combination. They recorded it with a bass vocal intro from Richard Sturban that has since been described as the most impersonated bass line in country music history. A low rumbling papa moo moo that sits somewhere between a freight train and a cartoon bear. Radio programmers were skeptical. The song was too goofy for serious country and too country for pop crossover, the standard complaint about material that ends up crossing over spectacularly. It hit number 1 on the country chart and number 5 on the pop chart. It spent 5 weeks at number 1 on the country side and sold millions of copies. The bass line became the single most recognized element of the song within weeks of release. The Oaks performed it on every television program that would have them. Sturban's bass vocal earned its own species of appreciation. People who had never paid attention to bass vocal parts in their lives found themselves trying and failing to reproduce that papa momo in kitchen, in cars, in office hallways. The song won the Country Music Association Award for Single of the Year. Dallas Frazier, who had written it in 15 minutes in 1966 and watched it go nowhere for 15 years, received a check that likely required a very large envelope. Number 1, He Stopped Loving Her Today by George Jones, 1980.
I watch the years pass slowly by.
This needs a moment of explanation because He Stopped Loving Her Today is not a joke song. It is by wide consensus the greatest country song ever recorded. It is so devastating, so perfectly constructed in its depiction of a man who loves a woman his entire life and only stops when they lower him into the ground, that it makes grown people cry in their cars while stopped at traffic lights. So why is it on this list? Because George Jones recorded it as a joke. Jones had been given the song by writers Bobby Braddock and Curly Putman, who had written it in a very different key than his existing hits. Jones listened to it, turned to his producer Billy Sherrill and said, in words that have since entered Nashville legend, "Nobody will buy that morbid son of a gun." He recorded it grudgingly, convinced it was uncommercial. During the sessions, Jones kept telling everyone in the room that it would never work. He was visibly skeptical. He recorded the spoken word section, the verses where the narrator describes finding the old love letters after his friend's death, with the weary energy of a man performing a task he expected to fail. Sherrill disagreed. He added the strings, the choral voices, the full production that Jones thought was overwrought.
She still preyed on his mind.
And released it over Jones's continued objections. The joke, to everyone's astonishment except Sherrill's, was on Jones. The song hit number 1 on the country chart, stayed there for 2 weeks, won the Country Music Association Award for Single of the Year in both 1980 and 1981, the only song to win consecutive years, and is regularly cited as the greatest country recording ever made. Jones later said he couldn't perform it live for a year because it made him cry. The man who had called it morbid was singing it to standing ovations in arenas. The record revived a career that had been sputtering under the weight of Jones's personal problems and labeled him definitively as the greatest country singer alive. He Stopped Loving Her Today appears on virtually every list of the greatest songs of any genre, country or otherwise. George Jones thought it was a joke. He was wrong. Nashville, and eventually the world told him so. The 1970s and early 1980s showed us something country music has always known but sometimes forgets: humor and heartbreak live in adjacent rooms, and the best country songs often knock on both doors in the same 3 minutes. These joke songs didn't just make people laugh. They made people feel that country music understood them, their ridiculousness, their pettiness, their weird small-town dramas, their bad decisions, and their stubborn human tendency to keep getting up off the floor. A dropped football prayer. A man named Sue. A dead skunk's spiritual cousin in a rhinestone suit. A bass line that became the most imitated sound in American living rooms for a year. Not every hit has to be serious, and sometimes the ones that refuse to take themselves seriously end up meaning the most. If you enjoyed this trip through country music's funniest chart toppers, hit like and subscribe for more music history. What's your favorite novelty country song? Drop it in the comments. We guarantee we've heard stranger. Thanks for rewinding with us. If this hit the right note, check out the videos on screen now and subscribe so you never miss another song from the golden age of music.
Oh, yes, they